Hi guys! In this course, we are going to explore real-time broadcasting using Reverb in Laravel. If you're new to broadcasting real-time events in Laravel, this course covers the essentials with a bunch of examples along the way. Once you're done with the course, you'll be able to start adding real-time functionality to any of your Laravel applications. So we're going to break this course up into multiple sections which will all cover channel types. First of all, of course, we're just going to cover the basics. How to get a real-time server up and running. We're going to be using Laravel Reverb for that. How to broadcast events and customize any of the data around these events that you want to broadcast. And then we'll go into each of the channel types. So we'll look at public channels, private channels, presence channels, and then we'll finish up by looking at client-to-client broadcasting where it doesn't make sense to send an event directly from our Laravel app. So let's go ahead and get everything set up and configured and start to broadcast real-time events in Laravel. If you don't want to miss the next tutorials on the channel, subscribe and activate the bell. The first thing that we'll need to do is get broadcasting set up within Laravel. Get Laravel Reverb installed as well and run our server. We'll also take a look around what this actually does to a fresh application, and we'll look at some of the config that Reverb gives us as well. So if you're following along, we're going to go ahead and create out a new project here. Let's call this Real-Time Laravel Basics and we're going to choose None. Okay, let's run through these options and just wait for this to prompt us for a database. And let's just use MySQL here and go ahead and create that out. Okay, so once our project is created and we have a fresh Laravel app, let's just take a look around this because it's slightly different from previous versions of Laravel. In previous versions of Laravel, it's assumed that you are going to use Realtime and Laravel Echo, which we're going to cover soon, will have already been installed and included inside of your JavaScript directory. If we take a look at app, which just requires in Bootstrap, you can see that there's nothing about Realtime in here at all. The same thing for your env file. So if we just open that up, if we look at broadcast connection here, you can see that this is currently set to log. So any of the events that we create inside of an application and we broadcast to a WebSocket server will just be logged out in our Laravel log file. So at the moment, a fresh Laravel installation assumes nothing about how you're going to be broadcasting events in real time. That's where we want to go ahead and install Laravel's broadcasting functionality. Let's take a look at this because this is going to then prompt us to install Laravel Reverb if we want to. Okay, so to get broadcasting set up within our project, we're going to go ahead and use the install set of commands and we're going to install broadcasting. So it's going to make a few changes to our application which we'll have a look at in just a second. Okay, so when we run this command, we get a broadcasting configuration file published. We get a channels root file published, which of course we'll be taking a look at. And we get prompted, do we want to install Laravel Reverb? Now, when you're working with real-time in Laravel, you can choose any real-time server. It doesn't matter anything that is supported by Laravel, you can choose a third-party server. If you want to do that, you'll probably have to pay for. Or you can pull something in locally like Sockety, which is another WebSocket server. We're, of course, covering Reverb, so we're going to go ahead and say that we do want to install it. So that's going to pull in the Reverb package and it's going to also prompt us. Do we want to install the node dependencies? That's going to pull in Laravel Echo. And anything else that we need to get this working. We will also add a simple registration and login section to the application by installing Laravel UI and Bootstrap auth. Next, we create the tables related to the application with the migrate command. And finally, we add the node manager package to the application. So now let's just take a look at how our application has changed. So if we open up our env file, not our example env file, you can see that the broadcast connection has already changed to Reverb. We'll take a look at where this is referenced in our config in just a second. But if we search for Reverb inside of our env file, you can see that it's added some basic sensible defaults for Reverb. Now Reverb connections or apps need an app ID, which we'll take a look at in a second, a key and a sequence. So really, these are only important when we go into a production environment because, of course, you're going to want to protect your WebSocket server from anyone being able to push to it. Okay, so we've also got some of these configuration options exposed to VAT. So when we reference any of these within JavaScript, these will now be available. Let's take a look at that now because you can see here that an echo.js file has also been published in our JavaScript directory, which is referenced at the bottom of Bootstrap now. Let's open this up and have a look. Okay, so Laravel Echo is the client side of your real-time functionality. When we push an event inside of Laravel internally using an event class, this will push all of our event data to our Reverb server, which we're going to start up in a second. Laravel Echo will allow us to detect if an event has been broadcast from our Reverb server, and we can pick this up in the client side. Don't worry if this doesn't make too much sense at the moment. We're going to be diving into Echo and receiving events later. But all of them configuration items that we saw in EMV are all being referenced here, so everything maps up and we know that we're connecting to the right server. Okay, so another thing that's happened here, if we just head over to our config directory, we'll have a Reverb config file that's been published. Now again, when you're working locally and just learning about real-time in Laravel, you don't really need to worry too much about this. But let's just head down and have a look at our Reverb service section. Just running one Reverb server here. Again, this references all of them values that we have in our EMV file, so the host that this is running on, the port that this is running on. And really a lot of this stuff you're going to configure in production when you want to start to scale up and all that kind of stuff. So let's go down because we've seen our server and let's look at our applications. So we can have multiple Reverb apps. So if, for example, we had a Reverb server that was dealing with two separate applications we were building, we can do that as well. This is very convenient. It means that we don't have to run Reverb multiple times and we can have two apps in here. And again, all of this stuff comes from our config. We can choose our allowed origins. By default, this is an asterisk, which means that this is going to allow all origins. But of course, in a production environment, you're perhaps just going to want to allow these to only come from a certain origin. Okay, so now that we've looked at our config and we have looked at the EMV changes, let's go into our root directory and we'll see that a channels file has been published. So these channels we're going to be defining up throughout the course, depending on where we're listening to. And there's multiple ways that we can define and return from channels. Laravel gives us a default here. This is a private channel which will authenticate the user and make sure that they are allowed to access that channel. Again, don't worry if this doesn't make too much sense just yet. We're going to be covering that later. Okay. Now that we know where everything is, how do we start up our Reverb server? Well, we do that from the command line. So let's go ahead and run php artisan reverb and start. Now that has now booted up your Reverb server. What you can now do is broadcast events from your Laravel application. And your client, which we'll be looking at soon, will listen to these events that have been broadcast and you can do something with the data that you're sending. Now, one really important thing about this is that we can actually enable debugging. So if we go ahead and just cancel this off, we can use the debug option. And this is really handy, particularly while we're just testing this out so we can see which data is being sent to our server. When we start to send events, these will appear here in the command line so we can see all of the data, which channel this has been pushed on, and when clients connect and disconnect as well. Now, you don't want to run this in a production environment because the amount of data that is coming through will eventually lead to this command crashing. We'll see that in the last section of this course when we look at sending a huge amount of events to our Reverb server, and we'll probably see a crash. So we're not always going to want to run the debug option just while we of course are debugging. Okay, so now that we have got Reverb installed, we've taken a look around the configuration and the channels. Let's test creating a channel and broadcasting an event from our Laravel application to that channel. The first thing I'm going to do is run npm run dev. So we build all of our assets. Then we're going to go ahead and run our Reverb server using the debug option. Finally, we'll create a new tab just so we can issue any commands. Okay, so let's talk about our channels first of all. So let's head back over to that channels file. Let's say that we're building a global chat application that anyone can join without needing to be authenticated. So it's just a public channel that anyone can listen into. Let's go ahead and create the channel out and then we'll look at how we broadcast to this channel. So let's go ahead and use broadcast channel and let's give this a name. So we're not going to use anything as complex as this just yet. We'll just call this chat. Now into the channel we get a closure in here. We'll always get a current user who is trying to authenticate for this. But in our case, we have a public channel. We don't necessarily need a user. So we can just define the channel out like this with nothing inside of here at all. Okay, now that we've done that, let's broadcast an event. Now if you are familiar with Laravel events, you know that you can use /Sun make event and you can create any kind of event that happens in your application. Events aren't specifically tied to broadcasting. You can have events and listeners within your Laravel application without having to broadcast on them. But events will also broadcast things if you tell them that you want them to broadcast something. So let's go ahead and create out an example event. We'll just keep this really simple for now. Okay, so we've created an event that lives in app and events. So let's go ahead and open up that example event that we've just created and take a look around here. So at the moment, this is just a plain event that we can broadcast from our application. Just to give you some context, if you're new to Laravel, for example, you might issue an event when a user has registered and a listener on that event might send them an email. In our case, this example event needs to broadcast a message to our server. Let's just take a look down here. We've got a constructor so we can pass any data in here that we need to broadcast or use within our event. And down here, you can already see that a broadcast on method has been defined in this event. If you were creating a standard event that didn't need to broadcast, you could just get rid of this method. But in our case, we do want to broadcast on a specific channel or multiple channels. So we can broadcast to as many channels here as we want because this returns an array. Okay, so we have a couple of options for the type of channel that we want to broadcast on. We're going to be covering all of these throughout the course. In our case, we want to broadcast on a standard channel, not on a private channel. Now the namespace is already imported for us. So we can just go ahead and get rid of the private part and we can change this over to the name of the channel that we want to broadcast on, which is chat. And we define that in our channels file. Okay, so we're not quite ready to broadcast this event yet. There's a really important step here that always catches people out. And that is that we need to implement an interface to actually allow this to be broadcastable. Now there's a couple of options here and we're going to look at both in this section. We have should broadcast and we have should broadcast now. The difference between these is should broadcast will always put this into a queue. And when you run your queue, this will then of course then go ahead and broadcast for you. Now we haven't set up queues at the moment, so we just want to use the should broadcast now interface. Implement that and this event is now ready to be sent. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, let's go over to our routes file and just to find out a simple route that dispatches this event. So we're going to go ahead and copy the home route here and let's just call this broadcast for the URL. And in here, we're just going to broadcast this event. Okay, so normally when we dispatch an event, we'd use event or the event helper, and then we would pass a new instance of the thing that we want to go ahead and fire off. In our case, this is a little bit different. Instead, we want to go ahead and use the broadcast helper to now broadcast this to our server. So Laravel knows what server we're running because we have that configured. The example event knows which channel to broadcast this to. So when we hit this route, it should just go ahead and broadcast this for us. Let's go ahead and take a look now. First, we serve the application with the PHP artisan serve command. Well, the page looks a little messy. To fix this, we'll go into the welcome.blank file and comment out the styles related to Vite. Okay, so let's come over to the browser. I'm just going to register out an account within the starter kit. We're going to need to go over to our dashboard later to listen to this event. But we're going to head straight over to the broadcast route that we just defined. Now, remember, before we do that, we have our WebSocket server running, so this will work. If we didn't have this running, we would get an error. Let's go ahead and fire this event off and see what happens. Okay, so obviously nothing happened here because we're not doing anything. If we head over to here, you can see that we don't actually get this event received at the moment because we're not listening on any of the channels. But that message has now been sent to our server. If we just close our server off just to demonstrate this and head back over, you can see that we get an error here because we couldn't connect to our server. So if you see anything like this, just remember to go ahead and run your server. Okay, so we've created an event. We've chosen which channel we want to broadcast on. Let's go over to our dashboard in the next episode and use Echo to listen to this channel and listen to any events. To be notified of next episodes, hit the subscribe button and activate the bell.